everybody, to the very special third anniversary installment of the Two Fish at the Table Poker podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Legend One on PokerStars.
And I'm your other host, East Coast Sam on PokerStars. We got a very special episode for you. Ben and I are really looking forward to this one. A lot of content we're going to be going over this time.
Yeah, Tim, I think I was so excited about this episode last night that I had a dream that I was running a marathon, but I dropped the baton when for it was like a team marathon thing, so I had to run the lap twice when I should have run it once to pick up the.
That's a shame. That's a
Yeah.
shame. Yeah. I had a dream that there was just somebody on the ground and I had to do CPR, but I had to kind of straddle over them to just kind of get the CPR and get the chest compressions going. That's right, folks. We're talking about cash games and in particular the new installments of some of the cash game shows we all know and love: High Stakes After Dark, Poker After the Big Game, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, again, one of our most watched episodes a while back was us covering the first seasons, the first editions of four different cash game television programs. And we have three of those same four back again on our discussion roster. And we're also adding No Gamble, No Future to our discussions here. We decided for this rewatch or watch, because these aren't relatively newish, that we would watch the first handful episodes of the most recent seasons of these programs, which happens to include the revival of the big game, now called the Big Game on Tour, watchable on the PokerStars YouTube channel. And so not only will we be comparing these shows to each other, we'll be comparing the first seasons that we watched a while back to the current seasons as well.
Yeah, I mean, cash game shows have been something that Ben and I have watched for a very, very long time. I have mixed feelings about them, generally speaking. I mean, I like sort of low stakes vibe of it that, you get these players in a room and they're just chatting with each other, and there's a lot more banter than you would see in tournaments. But I love tournament structures. I think they add so much tension, and the stakes build and build as the tournament goes on versus cash games kind of just more of the same after a while. So, I mean, compilations of hands, Tom Dwan making crazy raises and Phil blowing up, all that stuff is fun. But, watching these episodes, it really depends on so many different factors in order for them to really be entertaining for me.
Yeah, I kind of compare this to a sports match where it's like almost like an exhibition match for
Hmm.
games compared to like a title match for a tournament. Because when you win in a cash game, I mean, that's great, you win some money, but it's not like a poker achievement you wouldn't see on a Hendon Mob. You might see it on some, high scoreboard. Someone's tracking the biggest cash game pot of all time or the most biggest winner on a particular show. But really, it's just kind of a bunch of poker players swapping money over and over again. And that's kind of again always a thought in the back of my head that no one's life is being changed besides maybe just within that moment. Unless you have like a royal flush on the river versus quad or something crazy, it's really hard for these cash game hands to really kind of become poker moments in history for me.
Yeah, and
And
that's why the big game is more interesting, right? Because there's one person whose life really can change with that money.
yes and no. I have a lot of thoughts on the big game on tour season three,
Yeah.
which we'll get to, but that'll be a bit later. For now, we're going to begin our discussion with the most recent season of Poker After Dark. This program would revived on Poker Go over the last couple of years. It kind of would every year kind of swap productions with High Stakes Poker as far as new content dropping on the on the streaming platform. And so it's very similar to the original iteration from a decade prior when it ended, I think, in the early 2010s. Ali Najad returns as the voice or the in the booth. Again, a very minimalistic approach to commenting. Usually he only chimes in when there's a break in the table talk and maybe there's something worth mentioning as far as the action in the middle of a hand. We have a lady, Veronica Brill, on the floor occasionally doing interviews. The graphics are pretty similar to how they would function on the original version of the show. Episodes begin with a little mini preview, then there's a sort of a mini Poker After Dark introduction, and then the episode begins properly. And much like in the original version of the show, there's sort of clusters of episodes, so maybe 3 to 5 episodes that are dedicated to one particular table of players playing in a cash game, playing in a sit and go or whatever. And so there is a fair amount of variety in what could be being played as far as the games, any house rules, etc. But for this rewatch episode, we chose to just watch the very first collection of episodes called The Nosebleeds, 3 episodes that began the most recent season.
Yeah, I mean, the nosebleeds is supposed to imply, they're gambling with a lot of money. There's a lot of stuff going around. Yeah, some of these pots get pretty big, for a freelance writer like myself, a pot that's worth even $500 is a lot of money. But we're talking about, bets as big as 20K, 30K, and then obviously jamming all in, that's a lot of money there. But it's not like, it's not like they're playing for $1 million or anything. It's not like they're playing for a WSOP bracelet, which has notoriety, even if it's a small tournament or a small first place payout. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of just kind of the same or similar hands over and over again. They don't show too many, raise and takes it, which is nice, but nothing, there's not a whole lot of blood that's spilt throughout these three episodes.
Yeah, the stakes here are 200, 400 blinds of a 400 big blind ante, $40,000 being the minimum buy-in, and there's no max to buy in at the table. And the line of players, a mixture of players that I'm very familiar with and a few that I'm less familiar with. We have Zach Franzi, Daniel Negreanu, Matt Berkey, Dan Smith, Scott Seaver, MJ Gonzalez, and then Jake Daniels joins in from episode 2 into episode 3. Which is a little strange. You'd think that maybe if you were going to get a table together, you would have everyone there at the very beginning. But in either case, the biggest problem I kind of had watching as I was watching these episodes is not only is the action kind of like meh, but this money is pretty low stakes for a lot of these guys. I mean, I know it's just for TV, it's for fun. It's not meant to be, I'm going to stake my whole poker career and my poker reputation on this one game. But these guys like Scott Seaver and Negreanu, they've won millions and millions of dollars, and so it's just kind of weird to be like, oh yeah, they're playing 200, 400, which again for us that's like, oh my God, I'm like so nervous about one big blind there. But for these guys, it just didn't quite sit well with me as far as we know these guys can play and have played bigger stakes in this.
Yeah, and they all know each other, so it's, the banter's, kind of just on the lighter side, sort of frivolous stuff. One interesting component is that Gonzalez is one of Daniel Negreanu's teachers. So there's kind of a, I know that he knows that I know that he can do this to me. But they don't really play a whole lot of hands together. Again, Gonzalez acquits himself fine. He wasn't somebody I'd heard of previously. He seems like a pretty good player. But yeah, nothing across these three episodes to really hang your hat on in terms of a cool hand or something funny that was said or a blow up that happened, just kind of same stuff over and over again.
Yeah, and not only that, but one of the biggest flaws I have specifically with Poker After Dark is that we don't see the plus minus results for every player at the end of the action.
Mhm.
Sometimes Ali Najad will chime in, oh, Negreanu lost $17,000 so far today. He's down a bit. But it's just nice when you have graphics on screen, when you show the chip stacks everyone has, that you would just show that plus minus. I know it's not always easy if people are rebuying, reloading, or chopping pots up. But I just feel like even give me a rough estimate. You don't have to have it down to the exact chip, but give me a rough estimate so that way I know without even having to think too much about the episode how well or how poorly someone ran or how well they did and how when they left the table how far they're up or down. Just give me a little bit of that, please.
Yeah, I mean the whole production is very low frills. I mean, they're in a room, they've got the camera set up. Obviously, each player gets an appearance fee, but they're putting up their own cash on the table. I don't know how much Ali Najad or Veronica Brill got paid. Probably not a whole lot. It's designed to be as just sort of like, here's just what poker is, have at it. We're not going to put much effort in terms of the editing, which again is kind of nice. I mean, there's no over the top, Joe Stapleton narration. Ali Najad's not trying to do a bunch of cringy humor or anything, but it also just again kind of just makes it just kind of flat and boring and lifeless because again none of these hands are super exciting. You need to have really exciting players in order to make a no frills production style work, and it just doesn't really work here.
And I'm not suggesting that these pros are all within the same echelon of the poker world, but they're close enough that I don't feel like you had like the amateurs against the pros or the hobbyists against the professional or something like that. We didn't really have anything like that to enjoy. And something I thought was interesting is that this season that we watched, season 13, aired in 2021. So that's actually a pretty sizable gap, and it kind of feels like high stakes poker and no game on the future kind of were replacements for Poker After Dark as far as poker goes, content production situation. I wonder if maybe those other shows either had a better reputation or a bit more exciting with the fans that kind of has led to the show being phased out entirely now.
It could be. That's true.
I mean, the Poker After Dark brand still kind of exists in the sense like Game of Gold was kind of a adjacent show with Ali Najad sort of being the host and whatnot. And so obviously with more seasons of Game of Gold most likely coming in the future, it's not like this sort of avenue of content is totally dead. But nonetheless, with these 3 episodes here, there were a few big pots, ace queen against 2 jacks, or oh, they ran it twice and they chopped it. That's another problem I really have with cash game TV shows, is that when they run a pot twice and it gets chopped, even if it's like a 1-outer chop and other guy who had the best hand wins the first run or something like that. It's a little deflating because I kind of want to see pots not be chopped in on TV. That's just kind of deflating. I don't, with like 7 card stud high low, on like a main event or on a Worlds of Poker stream, that's a little bit different as a tournament. I don't mind that as much because there's a lot of drama too. Will they get that half? Will they be able to bluff the other half out or something like that? But in a, I understand why players like to run it twice in general to reduce variance and to see give players a chance to win some of their money back, especially like loose cannons in the big game. But nonetheless, I wish that was not the case as much as it is on these shows.
Absolutely, yeah.
As far as having a particular like favorite moment or favorite episode, I don't really have anything. It was pretty dull. I'd argue it was maybe as dull, maybe a bit more so than the equivalent episode we watched of Poker After Dark a couple of years ago. Because at least that one had Helmuth sort of yelling at the table and Sanjay Khan giving him a hard time and all that stuff, and that was a novelty factor. I can't speak to any like viral moments or anything. I'd be like, oh, at least if you can't watch this episode, just watch this one moment. I didn't really have that.
Yeah, I mean, I just spaced out during a lot of hands, frankly, like just kind of, oh, okay, that I just missed the turn, I just missed the flop action. Because yeah, again, it's just a lot of the same stuff over and over again. I mean, Daniel Negreanu is always sort of nice to have at the table, a good presence. So Scott Seaver. But again, neither of them just really say anything of real substance or anything. There's yeah, really no memorable moments whatsoever. Nothing I would put in a compilation as you've got to see this. The interviews aren't really necessary at all. I think they could be cut out of the show entirely. Yeah, just really, it's fine for what it is. If you want to learn more about nosebleeds, I guess you can watch it, I guess. I don't know. But beyond that, really no value.
Yeah, and no, I will say to my point about chop pots. There was one hand in episode 3 where Daniels was all in against Franzi, and they ran it 4 times, and Daniels did win all 4 runs. So I guess technically, that wasn't a chop or even a partial like a 3-1 split. But nonetheless, yeah, it's just not a show that I felt the urge to watch more episodes of. And again, I just think that tournament poker is infinitely more entertaining than cash game poker.
Yeah.
So again, I didn't have the highest expectations going into our next program. I watched Poker Dark first, then I moved on to High Stakes Poker. I know your order was a little bit different. High Stakes Poker, this most recent season 12 aired this year, 2024. So this is a show that's still being produced actively the last couple of years in its revival. AJ Benza in the booth again. Gabe Kaplan was replaced by Nick Schulman when they revived the show. I think a year or two ago, which it's fine. Gabe Kaplan was I thought he was great. We saw him in the one drop in 2014, so we've gotten our taste of him. They filmed this at the Aria. It's got the same kind of song for the intro, which I guess it's kind of catchy to every now and then to hear. I didn't mind that so much. But again, its structure actually very similar to Poker for Dark. We had 200, 400 as the limits with 500 people on ante. But the big difference here, obviously, is a different roster of players. We have Andrew Robl, John Ribeiro Balan, Jennifer Tilly, Vivian Yang, Andrew Pacheco, Justin Gavry, and Andrew Sassoon.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good lineup. I mean, I sort of like, Jennifer Tilly's sort of like the goat of these shows, and that she just brings a really nice presence, that she's not too in your face with her sort of table banter and comedy, but she feels very natural. She's also, a player that's willing to kind of mix it up with her hands. So I really sort of like her as sort of a cash game presence. And yeah, I mean, John Robert Ballon is always funny. And Andrew Robl also is, I think, not super as talkative as Jennifer Tilly or JRB is, but also kind of somebody who's nice to have at the table as well. But yeah, kind of similar setup in that this is again sort of on, not has a little bit more frills, so to speak, than Poker After Dark, but still just pretty simple setup. A bunch of players at a table bantering with each other, in a room that's clearly a stage, and they have appearance fees, but it's not super high stakes in terms of the money that they're throwing around, despite the fact that it's called high stakes poker. But yeah, I did like the show better than I did like the other ones.
Yeah, it did feel like high stakes poker compared to Poker Dark, especially had a bit more actiony hands. The interviews are a bit more present than Poker Dark. I won't say substantially better, but I'd say mildly better, relatively speaking. I did like some of the table talk in this episode. We had Tilly mentioning the Hollywood strike, the recent Hollywood
Mhm.
strike, and how that affected things in Hollywood recently. That's kind of topical. And this episode, I watched 4 episodes, I believe it was, of this table, and it did feel like there was a much better narrative of at least having one player just kind of rule the world. In this case, Mr. Andrew Robl goes on an absolute tear across this collection of episodes, just winning almost every big pot, winning every flip. Just lots of good fortune for him, and he's a great player. So it's not like it was all luck or anything, again, it's a narrative like that doesn't always happen in a cash game because the swing's gonna be so big. But at least that ties a little bit of the action together to make it a bit more memorable in my head than the drudgery of After Dark.
Yeah, and then the commentators and the other people at the table will comment on that and make little jokes about it. That adds to it, which is really nice.
Yeah, and again, I wasn't familiar with a lot of these players at this table. Obviously, Robl, I know a little bit. Tilly, we've seen in and out of various programs here and there. JRB, I've been a fan of since '05, since that circuit event he got third place in against Jen Harmon and some other guy, Doug Lee, I think. And again, the action here with a cash game, poker is played of different sort of rules than in a tournament where it's about stack preservation or chip accumulation. Players more willing to go all in hoping it's a flip or things like that. Or I can hit my gut shot if I'm in a three-way pot when I normally would fold this in a tournament, for example. So it's hard to be like, oh, this player played this hand right or this player played this hand well, because the money doesn't mean as much to them as it would to us. So it's kind of hard for me to like have a hand breakdown talk a few. But nonetheless, having two in the booth definitely is a much improvement as far as the energy and the feel of these episodes. I compared these cash game shows because they would air so late at night to like kind of like laundry or a beer on the couch television, where you're kind of like your mind's not exactly on the screen, but it's something in the background that you can listen to. It's kind of strange to have these kind of shows be on a direct to consumer streaming app, because you kind of have to actively watch it to literally to watch it. So I wonder if it was a strange move to bring these shows back in this context if they're never going to air on TV, because their episodes are length like they would in an hour block on TV with commercial break sort of design, which is again also kind of strange because I've never actually seen a show be a Poker Go original and then go to a television channel. So I question the formula of making these programs, but I guess there's rules that they have to follow. I don't know what your thoughts about on that.
Yeah, I mean, again, these are very low budget shows, right? I mean, you can get the sound set easily. You can get all the cameras and lighting and everything set up very easily. As I mentioned, each player probably has an appearance fee. I don't know how much. I mean, it can't be, more than a couple $1,000s for a night of work.
Mhm.
And then obviously they're ponying up their own cash. Uh, this is a very cheap, affordable program to run. And then, all you need to do is just mention a sponsor you had, sponsored by, razor blades, sponsored by toothbrushes, whatever it might be, and then you've turned a profit. So, I mean, whatever they want to air this, is totally fine by me because again, this is dirt cheap. Yeah, I mean, again, this is very sort of, you can have this on in the background while you're doing other things, no problem. You could be vacuuming your living room. This is on the television set because, again, yeah, there's a loose narrative of, Robl sort of ruling the world. And then players also, enter and leave. So that can be a little disorienting if, episode 2, Santosh comes in, episode 3, Phil Locke comes in. But it's,
Yep,
again,
yep, exactly.
very sort of just low efforts sort of television. So, it's not pretending to be anything it's not. It's not like it's trying to be some sophisticated commentary on capitalism or anything. So I'm fine with its presentation style and I'm fine the way it is. PokerGo can do whatever it want, whatever it wants with its content as long as it's worthwhile to some extent. There's enough stuff here that I think it's worthwhile.
Well, Satoshi Suvarna recently won the $250,000 high limit or high roller event at the World Series of Poker a couple days
Yes,
ago,
it
and
did.
it was kind of fun to see him in the show first and then watch the stream later. This
Right.
week
Yeah.
do so well because again, I'd never heard of him before. So props to him for having all the success. I think he won like 5 million plus bucks in a big comeback against Ben Tellerian.
Yep.
but we'll cover those events a little bit later. You mentioned, and I'll also point out too, is that episode 3 of this season of High Stakes Poker, the table layout changes, or some of the players change up. So Phil Lock does come in, Nick Airball comes in, Chino Ream joins in the very end, and he's sort of playing in episode 4 a bit. And again, it's just kind of strange that you only get 2 episodes with a few players before the whole thing has to shift around. I understand that there's only so many exciting hands that you can really show if there weren't anything else to show, but at the same time, it's hard because you're trying to get into the game of like, okay, player X did really well, and now let's see maybe push the boundaries a little bit, and player Z is playing horribly, maybe going on tilt, maybe going to go a little crazy with a flush draw here. And when the whole table changes, it's kind of hard for that to really be established. I will say this, that I thought that the table talk for episode 4 was kind of okay. They had a little funny thing about like the height of the chips at the table, like how many chips on their flat on the table equals the one chip sitting up. That was like, again kind of a weird little out of left field discussion. I don't see. I like moments like that. I think that if we had a few more topics like that, I would have been a lot happier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with people when somebody loses their money and bust. I'm okay with somebody replacing them. But yeah, to just kind of have like randomly, at the start of an episode, somebody just decides to come in just because that's just kind of weird for me. I think they should have a couple players, on standby in case somebody at the table busts, and then that person can come in. But yeah, to just have like Chino Ream just all of a sudden appear, and he doesn't really do a whole lot. I mean, he talks a little bit. He, is involved in a couple hands. It does kind of undercut the show as a whole and undercut the narrative that they are trying to build and the banter they're trying to build. As the night goes on and they become friendlier with each other, they open up to each other a little bit more and have moments like the one you just mentioned. So I think they need to make that clearer.
Not to mention, with like things like Hustler Live and the big game, you have players kind of sign in to be there for the whole thing, more or less. I mean, obviously in the big game, some players can bust and leave, but they know they're playing 150 hands on that. And in Hustler, they advertise, oh, we're going to have Tom Dwan, Nick Arabal, they're going to be here, and they're playing for hours and hours, and you get your fill of them from that experience. Whereas here, even they're in for 2 episodes, but they might have only played like 5 hands, and you barely even see them really in action. So it's kind of like, well, it doesn't matter moving along. One thing that was definitely very present here was a lot of straddling, and I
Mhm.
know that it's a common thing to kind of build up some pots to and stuff, and you're buying position pre-flop, but I don't know. I just think it's kind of dumb. Like, just look at your cards first. I mean, you're gonna have like 5 deuce offsuit, and you've just wasted 2 big blinds just like that. I think it's a very silly concept.
Yeah, same here. I would never straddle. I just would never do that. I'm too tired. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and so many players can like limp your straddle, and then when you re-raise your straddle, they can just four bet you, and then you're in trouble there. But I guess if these people are the ones willing to play for these stakes, so I guess it's not too. It's like you're already in that deep, so what's it being a little bit deeper? But nonetheless, it's something I thought about when I was watching this.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I would review each episode, do like a sort of a mini analysis, and then I'd do a final analysis of the show as a whole. And I would say I liked it more than Poker After Dark, a little bit better energy, but it wasn't anything special. Uh, I would say maybe I liked it equally as much as the original iteration of the show, which was to say it was just kind of meh, but it wasn't like boring or painful to watch. It was just kind of there, and I guess I would have, if I have to watch a show like this, I like to maybe pick and choose who's playing so I can at least appreciate the players a bit more at the table, because I didn't know some of these guys really at all.
Yeah, I'm of that opinion. I mean, I don't mind the fact that there are some players I don't really know as well, because
Mhm.
I like seeing new faces. Like I never heard of Savarna. Now, like I'll be looking for him moving forward because he seems like a nice guy, seems like a good player. I mean, I'll definitely keep my eye on him. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I have the same opinion overall. I mean, it's better than Poker After Dark, which I keep blanking out of in terms of its name. I have to keep scrolling up the page in my notes to remember what it's called. I'm not kidding. I've done that multiple times thus far. It's better than Poker After Dark, but it's not must watch television for me. Tournaments just have so much natural drama in them, and a bunch of people just, bantering and having fun and talking about random topics that don't really have to do with anything, just doesn't pique my interest.
Yeah, and again, as far as these first two shows we discussed so far, again, they're very similar in design structure to the original versions of the show. That form has not really changed. The only difference, I guess, is that After Dark does have the variety of it could be a sit and go, it could be a cash game, it could be all main event winners, it could all just be six internet personalities. There is a bit more variety to the game being played and who is playing, I suppose. So I guess you could maybe cherry pick from one particular roster and maybe enjoy that a bit more if you're into the who's playing. But again, we only did just a small sample size of each show, so and then going in sequential order of that most recent season. So keep that in mind if you decide to venture into the Pogo archives and find maybe something. Maybe if if we watched more of After Dark, we'd find some standard deviations above the mean that we had for the ones we saw, but I won't hold my breath for that.
Absolutely.
Which leads me into the newest show in sort of the four here that had not existed prior. No Gamble, No Future, which is kind of is funny because I had heard bits and pieces of this show from years past. I know that they have various gameplay elements that might vary from table to table, but coincidentally, the season 4 episodes that we chose to watch played it totally straight. There's really no gimmicks. There's no wheel or whatever that is of like a punishment wheel or something. None of that. This is just literally a cash game. Actually, lower stakes than the other shows to start off with. 100 and 200 to put 500 people on ante. 20K minimum buy-in. So lower stakes than before. The big difference here really is a bit of the presentation and also the guys in the booth.
Yeah, I mean, I did watch the fourth episode of this just to see what it was like, and there were
Same.
like little gimmicky things. Like there was a stand-up game where everybody was standing up at the table, and if you won a hand, you got to sit down, and the last person who was standing up had to pay everybody a certain amount of money. And then there's like the seven deuce off rule and things like that. I think those little elements can add some spark to the game and make they're gimmicks, but they add a little bit of something different. So it's kind of disappointed to see in these first three episodes there really wasn't that. And yeah, I mean, it's again very similar to the two shows we just reviewed in that they're on a stage, they're paying with their own money. But yeah, if you're looking for high stakes fun action, okay, 100, 200, that's not the lowest stakes in the world, but it's not the highest stakes either. So it kind of makes, No Gamble, No Future as like a title, as a brand, a little sort of weird.
Yeah, especially since the stakes are even lower for episode 4. So in the booth we have Brent Hanks, who has been a pretty regular feature player in the World Series of Poker Go streams the last couple of years, and Jeff Platt in the booth. And
Mhm.
uniquely, the camera, the display for the episode, occasionally will cut to them sort of at their desk on the booth watching the action.
Mhm.
Sometimes it'll almost like a picture in picture where you have the table here and they're down here. And it only happens a handful of times per episode, but it was something that definitely caught my attention when they did cut to them, even if it wasn't all that important of an occurrence. It's
Mhm.
filmed at the Poker Go Studios. I've seen the outside of the studio building. I've not actually seen the inside when I was in Vegas a couple of years ago. And the stack sizes again are shown regularly, but we don't see that plus minus that I just really wish we had that Hustler does so well when they frequently show the chip stacks. And so this table of players, a combination of players we've seen before in other shows, and a couple of ones that were new to me. We have Tilly again. Esfandiari, one of my favorites. Brendan Steven, one of our Bubble Boys from the 2010 main event, and also has popped up here every now and then in the main event coverage and other stuff every now and then.
Mhm.
Andrew Sassoon, John Morgan, and Alex Dombroff. He joins in partway into the episode, but buys in for the minimum, so that kind of handcuffs him a little bit. And again, different players in the booth, they bring a bit different back and forth energy vibe than the other guys do. It's not really meant to be like a comedic duo like Norman Shadow, McCarran, or Stapleton does. But they do fine. Jeff Platt's obviously been commentating for a very long time, so he's used to it. Brett Hanks is a bit newer. He's a maybe ever so slight self-deprecating every now and then. Not so much in Million in the Future, but just in general. I have no problem with them in the booth, but they do sort of serve as the only thing that really kind of makes this program, in my mind, stand out looking back at these shows.
Yeah, I mean it's very similar to the other cash game shows. I don't want to repeat myself too many times, but yeah, like, some fun banter here and there, mainly from Esfandiari and Jennifer Tilly. Esfandiari's dad shows up at one point. That's kind of funny. The fire alarm goes off at another point, which is kind of weird. You'd think that they would disable the fire alarms or something. I don't know, but just couple of sort of quirky little things that happen here and there, but nothing that again, no real viral moments. Everybody seems to be having a good time. That's nice, but nothing that you can really hang your hat on and be like, oh yeah, you have to watch this episode of No Gamble, No Future because this crazy moment happens.
Now, there was a bomb pot at the end of this episode, and that's again maybe the one thing that makes the gameplay of No Game Left interesting is that it does have things like the stand-up game, bomb pot. Maybe the 7 deuce that's optional. Obviously, the table has to agree to it, and that's something. But with bomb pots, again, it's something that I would never do in real life. Like I don't want to spend 5 big blinds or whatever to see a flop when with random cards. I want to see a flop usually for less than 5 big blinds with cards I can see. So and again, I'm a very tight player, so I would say my odds of winning would be less than one over X being the number of players at the table on average, especially with if there's like a Rick or something like that. Again, there are a lot of coolers in this episode, which I guess is okay, but again, and that's fine. Coolers can be fun to watch, but again, this is relatively low stakes, and these guys have so much money that this is not life changing for anybody. Jen Tilly, it's funny. I've wavered over the last couple of years, thinking she was a tight player, thinking she was a loose player, and I give her credit for that she seems to be, she definitely kind of balances her table image a lot in poker. Whenever I see her on TV, I would have a hard time getting a read on her if I was playing, although she does tend to maybe talk too much during hands to indicate weakness, like, oh, but usually it's on the river, so it's not a huge deal. There was one hand where she did have a flush against Brandon Steven. I guess that's kind of amusing, I guess, but otherwise, again, like you said, it's not anything that is particularly special to me, this show.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing really to break down even. I mean, it's again sort of more of the same. Amicable enough, fine enough. This is totally fine, watch it in the background of things. But yeah, I mean, I just again really just kind of spaced out with a lot of hands, missed action just because, it's just more of the same after a while.
Mhm.
Enough, sort of little funny moments here and there to keep most of my attention, but nothing that I can really say is, absolutely must watch stuff.
Mhm. And there's a lot of straws. I thought that episode 2 was actually the weakest episode of maybe all these shows up to
Hmm.
this point. Just very, very dull. There was a little bit of interesting stuff in episode 3 where we had a discussion of Helmut and Gentleman's costumes from the main
Hmm.
introduction, which you filmed on a video you can see on our channel. That was kind of an amusing little callback reference. And I guess Brandon Steven does get kind of tilted and losing a lot of money in these episodes. So that's kind of again when someone's angry, I like to laugh. It's amusing to me. I don't want anyone to be upset or more financially hurt playing poker, but I think they'll get over it by the next time you see them anyway. So it's not a huge deal. But again, we saw 3 episodes of this one table. Again, fairly forgettable action. I like Esfandiari, obviously, but he won $12 million a decade ago. He's still doing fine. He doesn't he can lose 50K and not be a big deal.
Hmm.
But then I was not expecting a brand new roster to appear for episode 4, and so I was very curious what could be different here. And so again, we have a lower stake table. We have 25-50 with a 50 big blind ante, 5K being the minimum buy-in. So we're playing 4 times lower stakes than before. Maybe they'd flip it because you'd want to maybe build up the levels across the season, but whatever. And again, it was a lot of players I just did not know at all. The only guy I kind of was Justin Young, who we saw way back in '06 against Negreanu on day 2 in the main event. But besides that, so this is probably the most notable, memorable moment of this entire show for me was how the show handles the stand-up game, which you mentioned the rules for it. Everyone it's for $200, so that's 4 big blinds that you would give to each player. So that can add up if you're giving out to like 8 players or anything. But I felt that the game really just happened. It didn't feel like we had enough. Any one hand was really focused on enough for it to kind of sink in. Oh, this player won, then sit down. Like not a single player double dipped or won a second hand for the first 6 hands that Sam came. So it was just kind of like a factory of bada boom. He went a hand, sit down. He went a hand, sit down. So really, like the first 10 minutes, those first like 8 hands fly by, and none of them really sunk in because it was going so fast.
Yeah, I mean, not knowing who any of these people were was kind of a big factor in that too. And that, I don't really care if Bretsky loses the game or if Ben Benz loses the game. I don't really have any emotional attachment to these guys. Obviously, they can handle, spending that type of money. Otherwise, they wouldn't have agreed to the game to begin with. So yeah, wasn't super interesting. It's just kind of like a nice little quirk, I guess, that could be funny under other circumstances. It was just a nice change of pace to have this element be in the show at all, but nothing that I found super entertaining or anything.
Yeah, it was funny. I kind of found that Justin Young kind of played pretty poorly early on this episode, which is funny because it was the only guy I even knew from in any respect at all before this. And I found that none of the players' action or play really stood out besides one hand. I'll give him credit for one hand with this player Mitchell Bank, who min raised on the flop, blind checks the turn, and then bluffs the river. I mean, it was, and then he says, "If I curse, will they bleep this out?" I guess it was an amusing moment. I guess I don't know. But otherwise, again, I've seen the stand-up game be played on Hustler Live, and that's been fine because you kind of have players that have to weigh. If I fold this hand, I lose to the player that would win the stand-up game. So maybe they change their gameplay a little bit. But the way it was handled here, I thought was pretty atrocious. And the actual ending of the game is skipped over. Like we see the first handful of players sit down, and then after like a commercial break, artificial back to the action, the last couple of players are shown in a quick little clip of them winning those hands. So like, it just didn't make any sense how that was edited.
Same. Yeah, I was really disappointed by that.
And again, it's not a lot of money, but it's like if you're gonna make this first part of this episode all about the stamp game, at least show the full thing because especially that last hand before it's over, I think is the most important hand because it's like, can this person win this hand and close out the stand-up game, or will it continue on longer if they get bluffed or if they if they don't win the hand? So that was unfortunate. And again, it's not something that I would ever play in real life because I'm happy to watch it. It'd be fun to watch it, but I wouldn't ever do it myself personally.
Yeah.
So my final, I wrote as my final words for describing No Go in the Future, just another show, nothing special. That just kind of sums up for me this show. It just exists. People watch it maybe. Nothing, but the poker world is still the same after it's come and gone.
Yeah, it's again, it is what it is. Exactly. I don't want to repeat myself. I have the same exact thoughts for pretty much all three of these shows. Just it's nice for what it is. It's low budget. Everyone seems to have a good time making it. So as far as I'm concerned, you can keep making it, but I don't feel the need to watch it.
Yeah, and it's funny because how Poker Go releases these. Sometimes I do once a week, sometimes I do 3 times a week, sometimes it's twice a week. They mix things up so no, there's not a ton of content that gets released by Poker Go besides maybe the World Series of Poker streams and maybe a final table or the whatever those tour things I did a while back. I forget the name of them already. The Poker Go tour stuff. So I guess they gotta stretch things out, but compared to something like Netflix or something like that, this is like if this is all they can give out, then that's not so cool.
Yeah.
But I'm very excited here. We finally get to our fourth program here, the Big Game on Tour, a revival of a show that had died probably like 13 years ago, brought back by PokerStars for the third season. I made sure I knew coming with no spoilers. I think I knew that Helmuth would be playing it at some point. That was as close to a spoiler that I really had. This program is just releases in like 45, 48 minute whatever episodes. Uh,
Hmm.
the episodes are actually divided into chapters. If you check the descriptions, it's kind of unusual because there really aren't commercial breaks, but once again, they do sort of this fake commercial breaks for this. It's filmed at the NAPT in Las Vegas with
Hmm.
James Hardigan and Josie Oppenton back as a team. Now, it wasn't Hardigan with the original Big Game on tour, Big Game and the first seasons, but Stapleton does return. They've been a team up, a pairing though for the EPT for years though, so they're very familiar with each other. And the structure very similar from the first 2 seasons of a couple of exceptions. One is there's no ability to play a second round after playing once like season one had. And also the stakes this time now are cut in half. So instead of it being 100K stake for the loose cannon, now it's 50K. And the blind, instead of being, I think, 200, 400, now it's 100, 200.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind the stakes going down. That's totally fine. I mean, the lineup, yeah, we got Phil Hellmuth, we got Jennifer Tilly again, Lex Veldhouse, Alan Keating, and Arden Show, who's an actress who I think was in Teen Wolf or something. I never heard of her before. I think it's a pretty good lineup. I mean, I think you have to have Phil in the lineup here. I know that a lot of people mentioned in the comments that they wanted Tony G. I also agree. I think Tony G would be a lot of fun to have back. But yeah, I was totally cool with this lineup. And then the loose cannon was a woman named Nikki Limo, who is a podcast host. So Nikki, if you're listening, feel free to, send us a message. We'll do an interview. And yeah, she did some sort of audition process, which isn't 100% spelled out. It seemed like there was a tournament, and then like the people who did the best in the tournament got to go and audition. And there's like two truths and a lie at one point, and they ask you different questions about, why you want to play and why you think you'd be good. They kind of like sprinkle these clips throughout. Never again quite explain what's going on. But yeah, like Nikki, I think is a totally, not that she's the greatest player in the world or anything, but she was a good presence. She seemed to have fun. She was willing to banter and do different things with her hands. So I appreciate that she won.
I was actually very excited for the first quarter of episode one because it
Mhm.
kind of felt like it was an actual TV show versus
Yeah.
like just, I mean, obviously the first seasons were TV shows, but this just felt a bit more like an actual TV show. It felt like it was the production quality was increased. We got to know those canon, I think, a lot better right off the bat versus sort of little interviews being peppered in throughout the 5 episodes that they were playing for. So I was good with that. And so again, I was pretty stoked. It reminds me of first watching Game of Gold, where I was just really high on episode one because I was impressed by what I saw. I didn't know what to expect 100%. And again, we had a pretty good lineup too. You mentioned that the players there, Helmuth, of course, being a big part of it, and the wild card player, not actually Veldhouse, like I thought it'd be. Alan Keating definitely like sort of the wild card crazy player at this
Mhm.
table, and so. And also, if Tilly, it's kind of funny. Tilly's in a lot of these three of the four shows we've discussed so far, so it's kind of funny. Uh, Going back to the structure here again, very similar. The loose cannon takes any profit they make above their initial amount. They play 150 hands, and there are options for straddles if you want pre-flop. The action pre-flop is pot limit, and then no limit post-flop. And so that's again so that the loose cannon can't just go all in, on the pre-flop of aces and just take the blinds down every time. And there's a rules video that shows, all this episode, which is a little annoying, but that's poker, I guess. Every episode would kind of have an informal title that would just kind of be like almost like a little mini headline for the episode, like the biggest pot of his life, or Phil's aces get cracked, something like that. So it's a spoiler of sorts, but it's not going to spoil the episode for you. It's going to maybe tell you part of one hand of episodes. So it's not a huge deal. And I saw the viewership for these episodes actually quite a bit higher than Game of Gold. So I guess there was definitely an audience and a market for this show to return. Obviously, a new show is a little bit harder to start from scratch for the new viewership. But I was surprised actually that these episodes, on average, probably maybe two and a half times more viewership than Game of Gold did.
Yeah, I mean, I think Helmuth is a big part of that. This is also a brand that a lot of people know about. They've seen, the hand with Ernest Wiggins. Check out our episode, by the way, just a reminder. They've seen, these hands before. This is a brand that a lot of people are familiar with. And again, having the loose cannon, you can kind of fantasize about like, oh, what would I have done if I was the loose cannon? Would I have done something different than what Nikki did here? So I think that, gravitates toward people. And then, the big thing for me is that there is a cap. That there's 150 hands. There's a definite end point, and you have to earn more than your 50K starting stat. So there's again a little bit more of tension and structure than there is with these other three shows where it's just whatever happens happens. So I like that.
Yeah, and again, the opening episode, minutes of episode one has introduces the show, shows us some old clips. They do show Ernest Wiggins' hand against Helmuth briefly, and it gets mentioned a few times here and there. That's kind of fun, and we get brief interviews with every player. Every episode, every player is interviewed at some point, talking about hands, maybe a little bit too much at times, but that's neither here nor there right now. Episode one, I didn't mind it though, and again, you mentioned that the audition sort of introduction process of the episode kind of tells us how Nikki got to this point in the loose cannon seat. And even though, again, a lot of commenters, I could agree with them that she's not really a loose cannon in the traditional sense, because I kind of think it needs to be an average Joe, average Jane, and she's not. She's like average Jane plus one, because she has sort of a career in entertainment of some form. So I don't know. I thought maybe it was a little bit. I was okay with it, but I thought maybe they could have gone for something a bit more typical American than how they did. But again, she does fine. Nadia Magnus, who was one of the winning loose cannons in season one of the big game, acts as her coach, and she was also a part of the audition process. It was kind of like American Idol. They had three people asking questions, and weeded out Nikki Limo as the winner. And with 5 episodes, each episode kind of covers plus or minus a few, about 30 hands, just to sort of evenly break up the action. Usually have a big hand to sort of punctuate things. So that's why it wasn't maybe, 30, 60, 90, 120, 150. And in most hands, not all of them though, were shown with a hand counter in the corner of the screen before it begins, so that we know how far in the action we are.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. That again, it adds a little bit more structure, makes it a little bit easier to follow. And yeah, I mean, the hands that we see, obviously they're selecting the most interesting, most exciting hands. Quite a few of them don't involve Nikki, that she folds pre-flop, or she'll call a flop and then fold to a bet, which I don't mind. I think it's nice to again show action amongst the five other players there. And again, there are some really sort of crazy hands. The hand selection in of itself, I don't mind across all four episodes. It's just what exactly they do to package it, the interviews they have afterward. We'll see a hand, we'll see everything play out, and then we'll hear the players involved, be like, oh my God, I can't believe, Cho did this, Jen did this, that really threw me off. And that just took so much time. And the first episode, I was like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of an interesting feature. And then from the second episode onward, I just started skipping through them. I just started skipping several seconds at a time, and I could trim like 10 to 15 minutes off of each episode. Honestly, it's crazy.
Yeah, so it got to the point where they actually released a video after episode 5 or dropped that was just called Just the Hands. And I did the calculation. So that video, I think cuts out a good like 35-40% of the minutes of the videos, because there were episodes that people were commenting their discontent in the comment section. It was like, they only showed 7 hands in 45 minutes. And again, with the introduction, you have the intro, you have the recap, you have players discussing where they are right now. I think how they filmed this was they would play 30-ish hands, then they'd all have interview segments, then they'd sit back down and play some more, so that they had it's still fresh in their mind after a hand, so that they could edit this together. And again, yeah, the balance definitely shifted a bit too far into the interviews, because there's some really fun hands, and I just wanted to get back to more of them. And I feel like, again, I feel like they were kind of handcuffed by the structure of having 5 episodes be the entire table. Like if they had made up 4 episodes, then you could, with the same number of hands, that I think that might have gotten the balance just right. Because I get that when Helmuth makes a big bluff, you want to hear him discuss how it went, but then you have to have his opponent talk about how they felt. Nikki's like, oh, I was watching this hand, it was so crazy watching this. And then almost every hand has a post-mortem interview sequence, and a lot of times players only get like half a sentence in before they're cut off to let somebody else to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't like that many interviews. I mean, just let's just see the hands. If you want to add in, at the end of the episode, have sort of each player talk a little bit about what happened, I'm okay with that. But yeah, I mean, 7 hands an episode in a 45-minute episode. And also, when you're cutting away to the interviews, you're cutting away from the banter that's at the table. And there's some pretty good banter here. Like the narrative in episode 1 is that Phil's not playing any hands. And it's just funny to hear everybody just needling Phil. And Phil, to his credit, keeps it together. He doesn't take it too personally. But it's like, that's like a funny narrative to have. Like, you wouldn't think of Phil Hellmuth being needled for not playing hands. I want to see more of that. That feels funny and natural, and it adds a little bit of like a self-deprecating element to Phil that we don't really see. But when you're cutting away to what's happening after the fact, you lose that a bit.
Yeah, but I don't want to harp too much on these negatives, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
strong elements of the show. I feel like every player at the table had a presence, had a style, had a moment, or lack thereof in Helmut's case. Obviously, he was at the table still, and so I appreciated that. And we actually do get good tallies of how much and how down a player is after every episode. And oftentimes in the middle of after a hand, they'll show like, oh, now Nikki's up to 54,000 from her 50,000, so she's up a little bit and whatnot. And with episode 1's conclusion, Keating was down big. He was playing pretty loose, pretty crazy. Not to mention making some very odd min bet river bets against Nikki for some reason. Lex Veldhouse up a lot, up 119K. Nikki actually begins episode 1 up 27,000 chips, which is pretty awesome. And I was thinking to myself, when you're Nikki and you're not quite like the typical loose cannon, like how much money is this really worth to you? Because again, 50K, if you tell me if I sit down in a tournament and I min cash, you're gonna make like 1.5x the buy-in usually, and that's 1.5x her stake right there. And so again, with the calculations of the blinds, how many orbits they're playing 6-handed, I'm thinking like, what, if you just fold the rest of the hands, and have a profit still, is that, for me, is that a strategy? Not very exciting maybe, but it's on the back of my mind here. Obviously she doesn't do that, but is something in my brain at least.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that came up in the earlier installments of the big game. Like we had Scott Fishman win that big pot against Phil Hellmuth, and then he just folded all his other hands, including aces. He
David
folded
Fish,
aces
David
pre-flop
Fish,
once.
David Fish.
David Fishman, excuse me. He folded aces pre-flop, because he didn't want to risk losing any chips. That's kind of an element that if they were going to do interviews after the fact, I would have liked to have heard that from her. Like, okay, here I am up 27K. What is my strategy moving forward? It's early in the session. Am I going to play tighter? Am I going to, do I want to have a goal in mind if I want to earn 50K? That's something that could have come up in the interviews, and it doesn't really ever come up, which I thought was kind of weird.
Mhm. It's funny. I didn't actually mind the ratio of hands to interviews in episode one. It wasn't really until episode two that kind of hit me because at least episode one we had the introduction with the audition stuff. So I thought that was just kind of the part of the process, giving us
Yeah.
a taste of what to expect. And by episode two onward, that was when the balance kind of shifted for me as far as this is a little bit too much. And again, they're playing 10-ish hands plus or minus one maybe. Some hands are relatively quick, some take a little bit longer. We did see the two truths in a lie part of Nikki's audition in this
Hmm.
episode, which I thought was kind of strange. I mean, it's not. I guess in poker you do have to lie and tell the truth. So I guess it's not the craziest question asked in an interview, but it just kind of I was amused by kind of actually us seeing it though.
Yeah, it is kind of amusing. I mean, again, it's supposed to be like a fun little game that you play to really get the sense of the person's personalities that they're good on television. So yeah, I didn't mind that at all.
Yeah. The only thing is, I just would have liked more interviews with Nikki to learn more about her as a person because we see her husband at one point. We get a bit of her in episode one, but really the majority of her interviews after this are just about the hand she played or whatnot or how she's whatever. So I thought that maybe could have been increased a bit more. But again, if had we had maybe like average Jane instead of Nikki Limo, I might have wanted a bit more than what we got. But it was okay.
Yeah.
And again, the action is still pretty good throughout this episode. Players are busting. Ardent Cho gets off to a bad start. She has to reload, rebuy. Keating, goes down on a pretty big negative swing, and then kind of bounces back a little bit over the course of the table. Hellmuth gets in the action a bit more, and so we kind of have that. Half the table is winning, half the table is losing. With Hellmuth kind of being in the middle there. And again, I like the action a lot. I just wish there's a bit more of it.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of highlight hand of episode two is when Limo manages to read Helmuth's hand, but Helmuth still calls and manages to beat her, which was kind of a funny hand to watch. And everybody was so impressed with, her reading him and then Helmuth just calling anyway, which is a pretty fun hand to watch play out.
I totally agree. And then the episode's conclusion is Keating getting kings and busting Arden chose ace jack, winning 2 runs of the hand. And it was the second time that the end of the session that Arden had busted. So that was kind of becoming a running gag of sorts, which luckily she
Mhm.
does not have a third recurrence of. Moving on, but episode 3 is really kind of where the whole table narrative shifts a bit, where the players that are winning lose and the players that are losing start to win. Particularly for everyone besides Phil at this point, really. So Nikki goes from the green into the red. Lex goes from the up 2.5 table stack buy-ins into the red, and also Alan starts his aggression starts to pay dividends where he's able to make some hands finally and chip up a bit.
Yeah, and this is really where sort of the interview to hand ratio starts to throw me off because the hands again are all really good, but this is probably the episode I took the least notes on just because I just skipped through all the interviews. And I understand that you're kind of trying to, set up, we're at sort of the halfway point of this session. Nikki's chipping down a little bit, so there's a little bit more tension there. But yeah, I just too many interviews. The one thing I did like was this sort of montage of Veldhouse just suffering and having a bad time at the big game. I thought that was kind of like a nice. It built his character a little bit more, added a little bit more perspective to him. But yeah, just cut those down a little bit.
No, I completely agree there. But at the same time, I'm watching these episodes at 2x speed, so it's not like I'm waiting 5 minutes for a hand to be shown. It's just that again,
Yeah.
give me a bit more. And again, I feel like again, had this been 4 episodes instead of 5, that would have fixed a lot of these issues, I think.
Mhm.
But again, an episode by changing up the plus minus of the table, it does put some more urgency into Nikki's play because again, now we're over halfway into the hands, and so you gotta once you get into that final 30 hands, that's when really you kind of have to maybe adjust the math of how you're playing because at that point you literally have nothing to lose by by playing a bit more wilder when you're running out of hands and running out of chips too. I mean, once you get below half of your 50K, it's really hard to now you gotta double up twice, and that changes things dramatically. It's hard to get into a good spot twice in so many hands.
Absolutely, yeah.
But episode 4 gets us to again a turning point. I kind of nicknamed this episode 3 Unbroke Girls because in this episode at one point all three of the ladies at the table were in the green, and that had not lined up for all three of them at the same time until this point because Arden was still bouncing back from her early deficits. Nikki was bouncing back from her losses, and Tilly, arguably the most consistent winner in this entire run of episodes. Phil maybe one notch lower because he took a little bit to get to that point. But again, I thought the action was a little bit better. I think there was maybe one or two more hands in this episode than the last couple, so that helped things a bit more. But again, just some solid poker action. And then the episode concludes with Keating deciding to leave the game after losing over $300,000.
Yeah, I mean, Keating was just such a presence throughout this whole coverage. I mean, just the weird min bets he'd have on the river, him just raising crazily. Yeah, I mean, the hand between, him and Cho, where Cho has a boat and he's got a straight. I mean, that was just crazy to watch unfold. And it was nice to see Cho after just suffering for so long, finally be in the green, finally have a win for her. So yeah, this was a fun episode to watch in terms of its hands. Absolutely.
And there were a couple big hands. There's also one kind of amusing hand where the three women were all in the same hand together for the first time in
Right.
94 hands. Like you'd think just mathematically you might have that earlier in the action. Nikki did win that hand, so it's kind of funny that she seemed to have, better luck against the women than against the men on average in this table. Although Tilly, to be fair, does kind of uh, maybe soft play a little bit against her later on, which is a kind of weird moment there. There was one big pot that was between Tilly and Keating, where Tilly makes a kind of I guess a sort of a hero call of a queen high flush. But I noticed that this was the first time in the whole show where they didn't show the hand number before the hand took place. I was keeping notes of the hand number and maybe like a brief blurb of what happens in the hand, and that was the first time I was like, oh wait a minute, I couldn't find it. They didn't show it.
Mm. Maybe it was staged. Maybe they put it in afterward.
Maybe. And so episode 5 concludes this action here with Griffin Benger taking the spot of Keating, just buying in for the minimum $50,000. He plays a few hands, but nothing substantial really develops with him because he's only joining in with a couple of orbits left to play. And this is where again they sort of the biggest probably the biggest WTF moments of the show for Nikki take place where she actually exasperates her coach Nadia Magnus with her decision making in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, first off, she runs the second nuts into the nuts, so that was just heartbreaking to see. Like she's come so far, she's so close to leaving with a profit, and then that happens. And as you mentioned, Tilly soft plays her, basically tells her to fold, and so she folds, but she's still crippled, which I don't think they shouldn't. I'm okay to like let that slide once. They should not be soft playing this loose cannon in the future. I understand that they're friends, they're sort of rooting for her, kind of, but I don't think they should allow soft playing like that in the future.
I mean, it was soft play, but it was like just on the border of okay because Tilly doesn't actually say what she has. She doesn't, and she does put Nikki all in. It's not like she just like checked back the nuts or something like that. But it was again so close to that line where you could debate it either way. But again, it's soft play. I mean, it's obviously soft play, giving it something away, but it wasn't. It was still within the rules, just barely, if you ask me.
I wouldn't. I don't know. Sure, I'll let it slide because I like Jennifer
You can let
Tilly
it
and I
slide. No,
want to
you can let it slide, but you can still think that it's either against rules or not. But I think it was again like a millimeter from the line, either in either direction.
Yeah, again, I just don't think they should encourage that in the future. I think they should treat the loose cannon as like anybody else and just not do stuff like that.
Mhm. And so with that hand, that gets Nikki down to about $20,000, which means that she goes all in a couple hands later against Tilly and makes again the biggest moment of just foolish mathematical analysis of running a hand twice when literally you have to hope that a hand that you're not an overwhelming favorite in can win twice. And what a surprise, they chop it up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with that once as kind of like a stack preservation thing, keep the night going, but then she does it again. I would not have done it that second time.
Yeah, especially since there's less than 20 hands to go at this point, and you have a good hand. It's not like you're going all in with like two undercards to like if you have like King Jack against Ace three or something like that. You have a bit of just go for it because you gotta win after that anyway.
Right.
It's not even like she was over $50,000, and even then, just being up like $800. I mean, that's whatever. It's not, but this was not a show that had like a prize for the loose cannon with the biggest wins.
Right.
Because we'll get to that in a second, but it wasn't. There was no extra incentive to go for the most profit possible. It's just for the sake of the money in the first place.
Yeah.
And it was funny how they kind of stopped showing the hand count for a good number of these hands at this point. I thought it was kind of strange. But I mean, even though it was a dumb decision by Nikki to run it twice, I thought that was entertaining. I just for her sake, as the audience surrogate of sorts, you just kind of want her to act in the most intelligent and logical decision making, and that wasn't the case here. But nonetheless, it was fun to watch still, even though it was kind of painful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, there's a few other, small pots here and there. Phil Hellmuth gets the last laugh, wins the very last hand of the night, so he takes a pretty good profit, which is, in contrast to his usual luck in the big game from years past. So that was kind of amusing. But I felt that this was a fun table to watch, and then we learned that Nikki gets a $5,000 ticket to an NAPT event, presumably later that year or the next year, so that she goes home not totally empty-handed, and technically any 5K event spot buy-in can win you who knows how much in the future. So that could be potentially worth a lot more than being a loose cannon too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a nice little thing for her to do.
Yeah. And so as I finished episode five, I realized all of a sudden, that's the last episode. So I guess their plan was to release these in 5 block chunks, and they're going to have more loose cannons later. But at the same time, it almost kind of felt like that was the end of season three, and maybe season four would be if they do another one, another chapter like this instead of like doing like 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 players in a row like this, and then having that be one season. I don't know if you thought that was okay or not. I thought it was a little strange to end like that.
It is a little weird. I'm not sure what their plans are if they're going to keep making more episodes. As you mentioned, these did better than Game of Gold, so I imagine they're going to keep making them. Yeah, again, if as long as they make some tweaks, have the hands be, have a couple more hands per episode, a little less interviews, I think they'll do totally fine because I think most people like this content. So yeah, I mean, we'll see what they can do in future seasons, but yeah, I mean, as long as they make content that make people happy.
I mean, the meat of the show was really, really strong. Like I would say,
Yeah.
arguably maybe my favorite cash game action, besides maybe some of the Phil Hellmuth, Tony G stuff in the big game in years past. But and I guess obviously our boy Ernest Williams too. But with all that filler in between, it just felt like it. But I wonder if them releasing the Just the Hands video is maybe them kind of having some fourth wall after the fact awareness of the mistakes that they made, listening to the fans, and maybe
Mhm.
that will influence future episodes. Again, like they could even have maybe 1 or 2 post-mortems per episode, but not don't have like 7, and then
Yeah.
maybe have one over the credits, the end credits, something like that, so that way you get a bit more of that out. And it would probably just mean they would have less editing to do. They just focus more on the hands shown. But again, we'll see. I like to believe in producers having some self-awareness for what the fans have been asking for, and so we'll see. I am surprised they only did 5 episodes instead of doing 1 or 2 more, because literally you just need a table, some cameras, and some players, and I'm sure players like being on these shows, and as seen by the personalities that they got for this one. So I'll be excited to watch more. But it just was odd to call this entire thing season three.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And again, Stapleton and Hardigan, I didn't talk about much. They just kind of do their thing. I didn't really cringe at anything Stapleton said this time around. I think he was a bit more locked in and a bit less goofy or puntastic as he had been in seasons past. I have no complaints about him. I almost feel like he's gotten a lot better from his like sort of cringe worst days in the late 2010s. I don't know about you.
Uh, I guess so. I mean, I again just think he's trying too hard to be funny. He's not very funny to begin with.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, he was fine. I mean, the commentary's fine. I don't want to give him
I
too
mean,
many
they correctly discussed how Nikki shouldn't have run it twice. That was silly, and stuff
Yeah,
like that. So they didn't say anything that I felt like I disagreed with fundamentally or anything.
yeah.
So I guess if we're gonna do our usual rankings of best to worst, I put the big game on tour Number one, could have been like A plus plus material, but it's still solid, but it could have, too much filler. I guess I'd put, I guess I put high stakes poker number two, I suppose, and then I'd put no gamble, no future third, I suppose, and then after dark last, I guess, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, big game number one, and then the other three I just say are all interchangeable. I mean, I just I have the same opinion about all three of them, so I can't really
I mean,
differentiate.
they're very close in the hierarchy ranking, and there's a bigger gap between the big game and everything else down here. Uh,
Hmm.
but obviously, I'm sure if someone made like a montage of the top moments of season 12 of high stakes poker or something like that, I could appreciate that maybe if they were good moments.
Yeah.
But it's nothing beyond what's on the page.
Yeah.
And so, besides everything we've just discussed here, we've gone a while about an episode, so we have a lot of different worlds of poker headlines and stories and happenings that have happened over the last month. Though I did want to go over some with you. I think
Hmm.
the biggest one that kind of appealed to you guys like us here would be the release of the Worlds of Poker, the top 100 hands. Originally, the Poker Go YouTube channel releases an episode and blocks of 10 hands at a time, counting down. So this is across tournaments, live stream versions of hands, main events, seven card stud. Anything is free game, anything that was captured on camera. And what were your thoughts seeing what they selected there?
So, I mean, just generally speaking, I really hate top 100 lists because I find it really like, let's just take top 100 films, for example. A great drama is different than a great comedy, right? It requires different styles of writing, different acting styles, different cinematography, different production design. A film from 1930 is a lot different than a film from 1960, which is different than a film from 1990, which is different from a film than 2020, right? The film in 2020 is going to have more money, more high-tech technology, so it might quote unquote look better than a film from 1930, but also, and it's also can, sort of look back at the past and build off of previous techniques. But the film from 1930 sort of has a different style about it. Like I find a lot of older films more sort of visually appealing than modern films because the production designers have to get more creative. They have to use matte paintings, things like that. So I mean, the point that I'm belaboring toward is like it's so hard to compare all these different properties together. And with poker hands, I think it's even harder because it's like, okay, top 100, like how are you factoring in entertainment value? Like what do you mean by an entertaining hand? Like does the banter at the table count? Is it like crazy river bluffs? Is it crazy like probability, a one outer, for example? In terms of a hand being consequential, right? Like how do you compare like a hand at the final table, which is more like obviously more consequential, to a hand that occurs on day one? What about a hand that busts a player out? What about, and then like a hand that takes place in 2020 versus a hand that takes place in 2000, right? Poker strategy and poker styles have evolved so much since then. Like what are your points of comparison here? Like how are you making these judgment calls? There's no information about what went into these rankings. Like I imagine that, if you ask the editor of this video, they would say something to the effect of like, oh, it's the most entertaining hands and like crazy things that happen. But yeah, like watching these 100 hands, I was just like, why exactly is, this hand 91st and this next hand 90th? It just kind of boggles the mind a little bit. I did appreciate that there was a fairly big diversity of hands. There was, a few hands from before the poker boom. There were a few hands that were from outside the main event, that this was main event heavy and poker boom era heavy, which is understandable because that's also, where they have the footage from. But yeah, just, it's entertaining enough to watch through these hands. But again, like what exactly is your ranking order? Is there a committee behind the scenes that's voting on the top 100 hands? I mean, how do you say like a poker hand is consequential, in terms of specifically in the tournament, in terms of establishing a poker player's career, in terms of what exactly? It just doesn't quite add up.
Yeah, I felt that they released one per day, and I felt that if I were watching any given 10 hands in a row, I would usually find maybe one or two that I'm like, that's on the list, really? And then
Hmm.
one where I was thinking like, this is only this spot on the list and are not higher or lower.
Hmm.
And that isn't terrible. I felt like if you going back to our old school discussions about each main event during our original rewatch, all of the key hands that I would have wanted to be in here are in here. It comes down to the order, which I don't think the order matters too much until you get to the top like 10, maybe, as far
Hmm.
as like snooty poker nerd being like, well, that shouldn't be over there because that was not, I didn't mind the majority of the selections overall. And it's just kind of a fun thing to have some big hands be in one spot versus having to click around and find it separately. But but again, I think if you look in the comments section, you're always going to find people saying, this hand doesn't belong to be there. I think back to a few years ago when the Poker released like the top 5 hands of each main event. How they were, I thought about like 2013, that number 1 hand was like that hand against Reese and Farber, where like it was like the biggest chip pot of the tournament, but it wasn't a particularly memorable hand. It was like, 2 jacks against ace 4 or whatever the hell it was, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt that this list felt a bit better than stuff like that from those lists, but I don't know. It was amusing. It wasn't a travesty, but I felt that if I was the one responsible for the list, I would have had maybe a bit better of a list there. But I only know I some of these hands were new to me though. That was one thing. Like there was like a Phil Lock hand,
Mm-hmm.
one of the early ones I hadn't seen before. So again, it was kind of fun to see hands I just had never heard of at all because I didn't watch the old school non-main event events really much. But again, it was a fun little thing. It's not something that I would take too seriously, but it was fine for me.
Yeah, I mean, I had the similar reaction in that, about, I'd say, I don't know, 30% of the hands, I'm like, why is that there? And then another 30%, I'm like, oh, that should be on there, but it should be on a different spot. Either it should be moved up on the list or it should be moved back. And then, 40%, like I was more or less okay with. Like, we're not going to go through all 100, but I did write down what the top 10 was. So 10th hand was cats versus Ryan and ace versus aces in the 1 drop, which was a pretty crazy hand. That was pretty consequential. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Number 9 was Condio 7-5 of spades versus Chung aces when Condio spikes the river and goes, yes, yes, oh my God. I think it
I
should
think
be on the list somewhere, but not number 9.
I think it'd be like 80, 82 or something like that. I mean, it's that was still with like 2 or 3 tables, I think like 2 tables to go in the main event that year, and it wasn't like
Mhm.
someone was knocked out, and both players still made the final table, the top 5. So it wasn't like, and it was like a 77-23, like 3-1 favorite. It wasn't too. I mean, it was behind by a fair margin, but it wasn't like a 2-outer or something crazy. So I don't know.
Yeah.
That'd be my thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, Condio, like, running around, that's funny. It is like a crazy hand, 7-5 cracking aces. But yeah, like, and then I set up Condio's stack, and he obviously made the final table, as did Chung. But yeah, like, I'm with you. Like, it should
Number
be somewhere
9.
in the
I mean,
80s.
it'd be one thing if that propelled him to win the whole thing, but
Hmm.
it wasn't even that. So
Yeah, number 8 was Brett Ritchie having kings versus Beth Shack having aces versus Helmuth having aces. Nope, this should not be in the top 10. This is the one I disagree with the
it's
most.
a fun hand for a non-main event final table. I totally agree with that. It's amusing. The
Mhm.
table talks are cooler, but I would take like Rich Zoo versus Labatt versus Mannion over this hand. And it's a very similar hand, 3 big pairs. And again, I have no problem putting that on the list, but I'd put it again towards in the first half of the list for sure.
Yeah, the hand that you just mentioned, the Rich Zoo hand, I think was somewhere in the 10 to 20 range.
Right, and you would think that those should at the very least swap spots.
Yeah, I mean, that was such a crazy hand, and again, really helped set up the final table. So yeah, I mean, that hand should definitely be in this place. Speaking of, a crazy hand with pairs that sort of set up the winner, number 7 is the Daniel Weinman hand with jacks versus Aguilera queens versus Payne kings, in which Weinman spikes the jack on the turn. Um, I mean, I'm okay with this being somewhere like in the top 25. I'm not sure about 7. I mean, it's a consequential hand. It's crazy. I saw this live and it was crazy to watch live. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind that being at the number 7 spot.
I mean, it's 7 though. I mean, that's
Yeah, I mean,
time. I mean, that's pretty high, and I don't know. I feel like we can do better than that. I think you can find 7 better hands than that one.
yeah, like I'm not as complaining about it as the number 8 hand, but like it was a consequential hand. It was kind of crazy. The reactions were impressive to see Weinman just kind of freaking out. Payne looked like somebody had just stabbed him. I mean, that was kind of crazy. So like, it's yeah, I don't think it should be in the top 10 per se, but like it should be toward the top of the list, I think.
That's fine. Yeah.
Number 6 is Stu Unger's last hand in 1997 when he won the main event a third time. No, I don't think this should be in the top 10 either. It's not like a super entertaining hand.
Right.
Obviously, Stu
An
Unger winning the
accomplishment.
main
It's,
event.
it's a big moment in his history, one of the best players of all time. But
Yeah.
put it in like, the middle of the list, maybe like 30th or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it was important for Unger to win the third time. He was the comeback kid. He was sort of seen as a has-been. We saw the movie with Michael Imperioli, the Stu Unger story. Like it's nice that that's recognized. It's nice that Stu Unger is recognized, especially because he didn't have any other hands on this list. But yeah, it shouldn't be in the sixth spot. Number five is Helmut's hand, where he folds the aces and says, "I can dodge bullets." I felt like they just put this in just to have Helmuth be in the top five. I don't really think this should be here. I think you could.
He's already in the top 10 anyway, with the other hand with Def Shack too.
Yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't mind having the hand where he beat, the hand that he won his main event bracelet on, because again, like it set up his career. It was kind of a crazy hand against Johnny Chan. Any high card Chan would have won that pot. Instead, Helmuth wins. And it was sort of like, it was like a big upset at the time. Johnny Chan had won the previous two main events back to back. Helmuth was some 25-year-old no one had ever heard of beating the main event champion. That could have been in the top 10 instead. But yeah, like it's a fun hand. I'm glad Helmuth is in here, and I'm glad the top ranking Helmuth hand is him doing something right instead of just getting angry. But doesn't shouldn't be in the fifth spot.
Yeah, and not to mention, like I've seen better, like bigger hands folded than, top pair, top kicker. I mean, it's not like this is like not number one against number two or anything.
Yeah.
It's a Helmuth character defining hand, and I guess I don't I'd be okay with it being on the list somewhere, but just not in the top 10 or top half of the top 10. Maybe like 87th or something like that, just to throw it in there as a comedy thing. But I don't know. It's again, a pretty egregious if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, the James Obst hand where he folds the boat to the straight flush, that was like in the 60s or something. Like that was pretty far back. I would want that hand moved up, at least 20 or so slots.
It's a day one hand in the main event. And I know it's Helmuth, but it's not. It didn't. No, the guy he lost a hand to didn't do anything in the main event that year. It wasn't even like it set up anything afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird selection. The next four selections I'm actually fairly content with. Number four was Scotty Wynn's last hand in 1998 when he won the main event. I think that's totally fine. It was a fun hand to watch. Produced an iconic line, "You call it's going to be all over, baby," and obviously set up Scotty Wynn's career. So I don't have any problems with that at number four.
Okay.
Number three is Lazar versus Matisow in '05. I don't think anything, I think you're confused by that choice.
I mean, it's a big hand. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I like that it's included in the top 100. I just don't think that it should be number three of all time. And the top, I mean, third best hand of all time is Matisow against Lazar in '05. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of cool with that as a choice. It was an important hand.
I
It
love
crippled
Matisow, but third
Matisow,
of
set
all
up
time.
Lazar. It was fun to watch. It was crazy to see happen. I'm kind of okay with that at number three.
I don't know. I mean, I don't mind it being higher on the list, like compared to the other ones we mentioned. I gotta think about it. I gotta think in my head of what would be my top five before I can argue it too eloquently.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess going through the last two hands, then number two is Duhamel versus Affleck. When Affleck gets busted and Duhamel wins, which again, like I'm okay. I don't know. I mean, I'm okay with it being number two. Again, when I say that I'm okay with it being in this, like I don't have like a strong objection to it. I'm not necessarily sure if I would have Lazar Matisow at number three, Duhamel Affleck at number two. But like, I'm content with that being a decision because again, it was consequential, sets up Duhamel, Affleck gets eliminated, was entertaining and crazy to watch, had just so many different facial expressions. There was just Duhamel's kind of like, and then just
That's very entertaining. It's very entertaining.
Affleck just losing it. I mean,
I mean, the second biggest hand of all time. It's just kind of it's a heavy tail to have to live up to. I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about that.
yeah, and then number one is Bluff of the Century, which I think, that's a no-brainer.
I mean, I kind of feel like just to go back to number two, number three, like if you're gonna put those in the top three, then I
Mhm.
think Benjamin Kasuf should be up there instead because that defined for me the whole season. Like that was the
Mhm.
whole season in one hand right there. And I think by that logic, if you're gonna go off of by going by that, I'd rather put that up there if I had to, for example.
Yeah, Benjir Kasuf, I think, was in the 60s or 70s, I think. It was on
Yeah,
there toward the back end,
right. And
which, yeah, like it set up it was the whole narrative. It was
up to
like a
that point,
climactic moment in that main event. Yeah, I mean, that should be up there. And it was entertaining. And I think it'd be fun to have WSOP being like the top 10. That would be a nice controversial thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't blame you for wanting to move that up.
Right. And then Buffalo Central be number one. It's kind of like it's just gotta be number one, unfortunately. I mean, not
Yeah.
unfortunately, but it just kind of has to be for what it led to afterwards. So yeah, again, I think any top list of any sort you're going to have people disagreeing with. So I think it's healthy to have discussion like that. But again, I'm happy they came up with this list, even if I disagree with a lot of it, because it's just kind of fun to see these hands again.
Yeah, and again, what exactly are your ranking factors and how much are you valuing each factor? Like Bluff of the Century is number one because it is an entertaining hand. It's consequential to the tournament that it was played. It's consequential to Chris Moneymaker and Sam Farha's careers and public images, versus the Richie Shack Hellmuth hand. It's like, what exactly is the consequence there? Are you weighing entertainment value over everything else? Again, they needed to make these factors clearer. Maybe they could have had like invited people from the Poker Hall of Fame to like submit a survey of their top hands. And that could have been interesting to see. Like, what would Hellmuth have selected as the top 10 most important hands? What would have, Todd Brunson selected? That could have been kind of fun, but they just I don't know how they selected these hands, so I'm just left with like, yeah, I'm okay with that as choice. I'm not okay with that as a choice because I don't know what their factors are.
I agree.
Yeah.
So again, that's a good topic right there. And some other stuff, that's just a lot of sort of almost like headline stuff I wanted to pick your brain about.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
for example, before this World Tour started, they changed up the value of a min cash to the min cash being 2 times the buy-in. Are you okay with that? Are you not okay with that? Any thoughts on that at all?
It depends on how exactly the tournaments are done, right? And it depends on like what the payouts are after that, right? Because I mean, it's kind of a joke to have, top 12 of the main event, the jump between 10th and ninth place is less than $100,000. And then the jump between, eighth and ninth place is $125,000. Like people have complained about that for years because they required to pay only 15% of the field and that each final tableist made $1 million. As long as the pay jumps make sense and are distributed evenly, depending on how the tournaments are done, I'm okay with that.
And then another big change up is the rules for Player of the Year. The
Hmm.
points is a bit more almost like the Mindsport Olympiad here, in that you have 10 cash maximum, 5 cash minimum, and only your best online bracelet event cash counts. So again, changing up, because before you might have players have like 24 caches and then be like min cash, min cash, min cash time plus one level of payout, but now it's a bit different. I mean, I would have to see how it plays out, see who wins this year to have a final opinion on it. But I'm kind of against this change if you ask me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I understand that you want to obviously like somebody who's super wealthy can just sit at the sit at the World Series and play 30 events and cash 20 times and they'll be further up on the leaderboard than somebody who's less wealthy. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna have to see this play out. I mean, right now, as we're recording this, Scott Seaver's in the lead because he's won 2 bracelets. Chris Huhne is right behind him. He's won 1 bracelet, got a third place, and then Jeremy Osmus is a couple hundred points behind
He's
Huhne,
been
but
killing it.
still has a really good shot of winning Player of the Year. Like he might be the guy to beat this year. Um,
He's still a lot
yeah,
of yeah, the PPC.
I'd have to yeah, we're just gonna have to see how this plays out. I think it could be a little bit more accommodating to online players. I mean, there's why not have a couple more caches for online, maximum of 3, instead of just 1. I think that's fair.
Especially since the ratio of live events and online events, I think there's like 99 live events and like 30, like over 30 online events. So I almost
Yeah,
feel like you should be able to have like, because that's a 3-to-1 ratio. You should be able to have a quarter of your caches be online. So that'd be 2.5.
yeah,
So it'd be like 2 or 3 at least. I mean, just have one is kind of deflating. I mean, it means if you win one online bracelet, then there's no point in playing online after that.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think have a maximum of 3 online tournaments. I think that's fair. And then, you have to do like,
Or have the points be maybe less for online events
yeah.
just to compensate. I don't know. I again, well, it just it didn't sit right with me when I first read up on the rule change, and obviously I can change my mind once I see who wins it. But if someone who wins 2 bracelets and had 8 other caches to make 10 that were like min caches wins it, I'm okay with that personally. But I'd have to see if it's Seaver or if it's Osmus or whoever. Because Osmus is killing it this year. Like I'm really impressed with his play. He's still in the PPC right now with a lot of chips, so he might get a few points there and take the lead. But we'll see. In any
Yeah.
case, that's my thought there. This is a question we discussed before, but I'll ask you again on recording here. Would you rather win the main event for $12 million or win the lottery for $40 million?
Win the main event because it's an experience. You can leverage it into other opportunities. You have the bracelet. You get to some degree of prominence you can turn into other things. And also, I this is a total coincidence, but like the other day, I was just reading stories about lottery winners who've won like $40 million, and like they get murdered so often. They have people break into their homes. I know that main event winners have also had this problem in the past, but I think there's a little bit less of a problem with main event winners. And it's also like you've earned it. You went through the field, you played for 10 days, you have all these sort of sub stories and stories that go along with this, and you won it versus you just had a piece of paper with some numbers on it. So as much as it would be, for turning down a lot of money, I would rather win the main event.
No, I respect that. I think I do the same thing. After a certain amount of money, it's kind of all the same at that point. You're set for
Mhm.
life and live your best life at that point. Recently, Sam, I have been mildly engaging with the poker world on Twitter, just sort of replying to certain comments, whether it's by Helmuth, by Raymer, by Brian Mike, whoever. And I actually got 2 likes from Phil Helmuth when I commented on his tweets. So that was really exciting for a fanboy like me. But as it would turn out, as I've been, mildly posting on Twitter on these threads or whatever, I've accumulated 33 bot followers on Twitter. Like every day I'll wake up, I'll see on my notifications, you have a new follower, and it's just some guy with no post that has some link on it. So if I thought it was very strange the role of Twitter right now.
Yeah, I had a Twitter account back when I was like 13, and I only got bot followers. I had like 10 bot followers for a couple of years. I eventually just deleted my account. One day I wrote, if you're following me, please reply back to this, and none of them did, so I just deleted my account after that. So, you beat me in the follower count, so 33, there you go.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And again, like guys like Raymer will regularly update their stacks every few hours in an event, tell them how they're doing. Raymer
Mhm.
had a pretty rough summer bit from what I've read. He did run for really, really far in the seniors event, so good for him. He got like 18 buy-ins
Mhm.
as cash for 40th place in that very big field. So great job by him. Hoping to see him spin that into some main event success. A couple controversies I read up on poker recently was for the casino event employees event,
Mhm.
should World Series of Poker reporters count as employees for that event? I think no, but reporters think no, think yes.
I mean, by casino employees, they're talking about just like anybody who works for the casino.
Dealers, waitresses, waiters, managers, I'm sure. Like I don't think reporters belong in that event at all.
Yeah, if you don't work for the casino itself, I don't think. If you want to have like a reporters event, podcasters and reporters, I'd be cool with that, but I
Like
don't
if you
think that.
wrote an article for work about a casino for in Pennsylvania, and
Mhm.
you wouldn't go to the casino employees events for that, right? Because you just did an article about them. You didn't work there.
I have actually written articles to promote online casinos.
Right.
So yeah, I guess I'm a casino employee now. I should register for the WSOP next year.
Yeah. As far as we're like 50-ish events, 50, 60 events into the roster of events here, although only a fraction of the online events, ironically. Uh,
Hmm.
I'll be honest, I was pretty underwhelmed by the first dozen or so events of the World Series, both from who was winning, who was the final table streams and Poker Go. I was underwhelmed. And then all of a sudden, event 16 rolls around and just kind of flip things on my head of a very entertaining heads-up match that had a lot of table talk, a lot of celebration by a guy who was severely short stacked when heads up began, and he ended up winning that event. And then from there, it's just been really solid event foul table after another with a lot of the high rollers. Jeremy Osmus, for example, we had Chance Cornuth running through many times. Obviously, Ivy winning a bracelet, Seaver winning a bracelet. It's things have really turned around for me. I've really been entertained.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I mean, 16 was really the turning point with Bret Hart versus Eddie Ochana. Bret Hart coming from a huge chip deficit after Ochana had pretty much been running the whole final table over. with really interesting moments. At one point, Ochada asked for some chips, could make change, and Bret Hart said, "No, you're going to have to earn these," which is such a not quite out of line from an etiquette level, but just kind of just an
I'm
interesting
not in line
moment to
really
have.
either. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's allowed to do whatever he wants. I just thought it was kind of funny. Yeah, I mean, I think since then it has been a very interesting WSOP. Yeah, Jeremy Osmus has just been killing it. He's really somebody who, yeah, I mean, we all know that he was talented before, but he's really been killing it. Big Hooney, yeah, having, really crazy run in the big high limit events.
The
You know,
100K he won the whole thing coming from behind against like Chance Corneth and I forget the other guy, but that was really impressive too.
hmm Yeah, and Scott Seaver, as I mentioned, has won two bracelets. He's sort of Hall of Fame contender. If he wins Player of the Year this year, I mean, he's definitely cemented his resume as being in there. So is Jeremy Osmus, as far as I'm concerned. And John Raichner too is also up there. He's won at least, I think he's won one bracelet so far. And then yeah, I mean, Phil Ivey has returned, winning his 11th bracelet and performing very well in other events. It's really nice to have him back. He's really rocking his hat game. You mentioned earlier that Greg Raymer hasn't quite had the greatest summer, and that's true, but probably the worst summer has to go to Mike Matisow, who has just his vlogs lately are just so sad. He's broken up with his girlfriend, and then his girlfriend got seated next to him at an event. Did you see that vlog?
I saw that. I saw that. That was
Isn't that
hilarious.
crazy? And just
Pretty
like his
wild.
vlogs are just him just zipping around the Paris, Las Vegas, just talking about bad beats. It's like, dude, I'm so sorry. Like, just maybe you need to change careers and just.
I know, sir. And his documentary came out relatively recently. It hasn't dropped for us to see yet, but I'll be very excited to watch that very soon in the future.
Yeah.
Daniel Negreanu, we didn't mention him yet. So he had a couple of very solid runs in the first two events he played, and then kind of has and particularly in the high rollers, he's like made it to like one notch before the money bubble in a lot of these
hmm
events. So he's not like bubbling, but he's like soft bubbling a lot of these events. So he's done it quite a bit, but he has been playing pretty well, although I he's still alive in the PPC right now with 12 left. And so I think he's one of the shorter stacks right now, though. But he's still in the mix there along with Phil Ivey. So uh looking forward to seeing if they can spin things up and get maybe heads up. Pretty cool. Negreanu did make like an 11th place in the Raz event, the 10K Raz, lost to Ivy, ironically. So these two guys are kind of in tandem a lot of these big events here. Helmuth got a fourth place finish in an event a while back. I watched that live stream. I think I forget, it was like Deuce set or something like that.
hmm
So again, it's fun to have him be there, even though he had some bad luck as it got to four-handed there. But I was thinking about Negreanu here, and I want to ask you, Sam, as a fan of his, do you like that he does these vlogs, or would you rather maybe he like take 1 year off from vlogging so he can focus more energy and time into his game? As I feel like he handles the balance well, but I wonder if maybe there's even the slightest chance that he might be a bit more on point if he didn't vlog.
I mean, I have no idea if the vlogs really affect him or not. I mean, I don't imagine they would. I mean, he seems like such a professional that I don't think, if him filming himself with a video camera is going to throw him off. And he's done very well for himself on YouTube. So I'm fine with him vlogging.
Fair enough. I did see on Poker Go, another topic here, Sam. There's this like VIP account option now where it's like you get like poker lessons or something from a few guys, and I thought that's just really weird. Like just Netflix doesn't offer you like a VIP account to learn how to garden or something weird. So I don't know. I feel like it's just kind of silly personally. What about you?
Whatever money they again what like I don't really care, but like whatever they want to try to do is fine. If they've got, I don't know, Scott Seaver teaching people through the Poker Go app, fine. If people want to buy that, they can. But we're not going to buy that. I'm not going to spend my money on that.
I told you this a while, but one of my favorite shows as a kid was something called the Joe Schmo Show on
hmm
Spike TV, now a defunct channel. And one of the main actors slash writers, Brian Keefe Etheridge, got second place in a bracelet event this year, and I was ecstatic to see that guy. I had no idea what poker was in his skill set there. I was very impressed by that.
Yeah, congrats to him.
There was a Mind Sport Olympiad reference in a live stream a couple days ago for one of the bracelet events. I don't know if you caught that.
No, I
I
didn't catch it.
that was pretty cool. It's kind of funny because we're always name dropping it, so it was kind of cool to see that on one of their live streams too.
Yeah, fun.
One more reporting controversy. There's a Poker News brand, not branded, like sponsored event like the $600 Poker News No Limit Hold'em Deep Stack event,
Yeah,
and different websites got the exclusive reporting rights for that event. So Poker News is not allowed to report on that event. How funny is that?
that is really funny. That's strange.
I know. And then my last bullet point here is there was this pretty wild Hustler live hand with Alan Keating where
Mhm.
he was all in against another player, and he offered to run the river another time to hit a flush draw over and over and over. 50K for another run, 60K for another run. Alan Keating lost every single time he made that bet. I think he lost almost $500,000 trying to hit a flush draw like 6 or 7 times in a row. I don't know if you saw that hand, but it was pretty crazy.
I didn't see that hand. That's weird. That's
Yeah,
just
Alan Keating,
strange.
he's like the MVP of bad gambling in our podcast tonight today.
He's got the money. He's got the money.
Anything else that you wanted to drop here? We covered a lot of topics and very quickly, but anything I've been talking a lot to you. What about you?
For those of you who are wondering, I did finish Ozark. It's not very good. I wouldn't recommend it.
Fair enough. The only thing I wanted to bring up to you, Sim, is I'm going to be officially retiring the Poker Go or GG Poker T-shirt I got from Vegas 3 years ago. As you see, it's full of holes, and it is the material is not very sturdy. You can see there's like
Yeah.
all
Ugh.
around here. I've had T-shirts from college from over a decade ago still hold up. This one just fell apart on me very quickly. I will be retiring this shirt. Even it has 2021. This is my funeral service to it right here.
Yeah, I think I've had this shirt for like 6 years now, so there's no holes or anything. So yeah, it's kind of a shame that that shirt fell apart. It's a nice shirt.
I liked it, but I'll be throwing it out today, sadly. But bye bye. On that
You're not
note,
going to keep it
guys,
as a souvenir?
now maybe I'll think about it. On that
Yeah.
note, guys, we want to thank you for listening to our podcast. We had a little bit of a break there, but we were enjoying a lot of poker action in the meantime. So we'll be definitely back to talk about the rest of the main event stuff coming up and go from there.
Yeah, I mean the main event is just just a couple weeks away. It's coming up, so we'll try to cover as much of it as possible, as well as the side events. Just keep our eye on it. And again, if you're interested and have any suggestions for things we could talk about, drop them in the comments section. We're always welcome to have interviews or anything. So if you want to hop on the podcast, we are more than welcome to. So just let us know.
So until next time, guys, enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, enjoy your poker on TV.
Take care.